Congress is getting back to work to tackle the biggest issue that the United States is currently facing. Lawmakers have announced that their top priority is to pass a major spending bill. It would help prevent a catastrophic government shutdown. Democrats may be forced to accept several Republican priorities. This could affect many low-income Americans, especially those in their low-income households. But GOP hardliners in the House are eager to play a game of chicken over the end of the month deadline to fund federal agencies, seeking to force the White House and Senate to make a choice that is either accept many conservative priorities or risk a debilitating government shutdown. Once again, caught in the middle is House Speaker McCarthy. In a private conference last week, McCarthy urged his colleagues to avoid a back short-term spending deal to avoid a shutdown from happening. But according to CNN, his argument is that the year-long spending bills to fund the federal agencies would have been demanded, including the hot-button issues. He argued if they spend too much time squabbling among themselves, they'll end up getting blocked by senators in both parties and forced to accept higher spending levels than they'd like. The two sides are hundreds of billions of dollars apart from McCarthy backed away from a previous deal he cut with the White House and later agreed to pursue deeper cuts demanded by his high-right flank. Now the two sides will have to work together to punt the flight to potentially early as of December. Now, according to a new report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. hiring space took spree in recent months. This is as employers took on a few workers and provided smaller wage increases. Hiring held steady in August as the U.S. economy added 187,000 jobs. While the unemployment rate remains historically low, it ticked up to 3.8% last month. A sharp downward revision of job growth estimates in June and July lowered these totals by a combined 110,000 jobs. The mildly bad news for workers is well for the nation's fight against inflation, since in theory the looser the job market, the slower pay hikes take, the better pressure off the companies. The new hiring data arrived more than a month ago after the Fed raised its benchmark interest rate another quarter of a percentage point, reviving its aggressive inflation hike. But inflation stands well below its peak level of summer. Now, price increases accelerated slightly in July, suggesting a bumpy road toward bringing costs down to normal levels. In remarks made at an economic conference in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Jerome Powell said bringing inflation down to normal levels would require a loosening of the labor market. He described the recent slowdown in hiring as a rebalancing act of supply and demand. Over a year-long period ending in August, average earnings increased 4%, which remains robust, but marks a slight slowdown from year-to-year over wage increases. Speaking at the White House on Friday, Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden touted the solid wage increases, saying he believes price hikes can slow without a decline in pay or an increase in unemployment. Still, the mild cool down of pay increases are making some concerns around the world.
Well, this week, as you know, we're going to consider a legislative package of 3 strongly bipartisan bills that we wrote in the Appropriations Committee to fund everything from veterans care, military construction, transportation and housing, critical nutrition programs, support for our farmers and agricultural research, and even the FDA. It is important to note, as we wrote these bills during the committee process, I made certain to work in lockstep with my counterpart, Vice Chair Collins. Together, we collaborated closely with members on both sides of the aisle, on and off the committees, to get input from nearly every senator and wrote strong bipartisan bills. Do I believe these bills are what either of us would have written on our own? Of course not. But that is compromise, and that is how you can make sure that government can be functional.
Former president has said this about the fourth stimulus check. They want to pass it now. Over 200 lawmakers are expanding the relief to millions of Americans, and Democrats and Republicans are beginning to discuss a negotiation that could send this to you. But as congressional Republicans increase discussions on social programs, a trio of Democrats in the House have reintroduced legislation that would make permanent the expanded multi-child tax credit. Even the American Family Act has been reintroduced by Representative Rosa DeLauro and Susan DeBlayne. But the bill has been backed by over 200 House Democrats. The bill would expand the permanency of the expanded child tax credit as established in the American Rescue Plan. The expanded child tax credit would be expired at the end of the year, even as inflation continued to affect millions of Americans. The recently proposed bill would continue $300 monthly checks for children aged 6 and younger, while expanding the maximum credit to $250 per month and $3,000 annually. It is up from $2,000 under the previous policy. The bill also provides the full credit to children that have been left behind previously by revoking a rule limiting the refundable portion to $1,400 a year. It also eliminates the earnings requirement that previously excluded about a third of eligible children from full credit. Representative DeLauro's office has noted that the expanded child tax credit assisted more than 60 million children and lifted nearly 4 million people out of poverty. And when they expanded and improved the child tax credit under the American Rescue Plan, it provided unprecedented economic security for families. The most recent monthly payments have helped people pay their bills and keep nutritious food on the table, afford school supplies, as well as manage mortgage or rent payments. Several Democrats have made it clear that this credit would be an investment to children and families. Advocacy groups have shown support for the bill's reintroduction. Even executive director of the Institute of Taxation said, "We are thrilled to see lawmakers prioritizing tax credits for the low and the middle income." The American Family Act comes amid Republicans' proposals to change the programs, including slashing funds for rental assistance and education programs. Folks, still, 2 states are ready to significantly ramp under the financial incentives for this bill to adopt renewable energy and EV vehicles under new laws that mimic the federal clean energy tax credits. The Minnesota lawmakers recently agreed on a $2 billion budget that dedicates hundreds of millions of dollars to cutting greenhouse gas. And what's clear about this is that Minnesota is going all in on this. About 900 million people, $900 million in Minnesota's next 2-year budget will pay for the tax credit. And because the credit is situational, not all families will be getting the stimulus money, only certain households.
You know, first quarter of the 20th century, the poet Carl Sandburg described Chicago as a city of big shoulders. A city of big shoulders. He was describing the big shoulders of a working class American town who were building this city. At the same time, building the middle class. I'm here in Chicago today for the first quarter of the 21st century to talk about the economic vision for this country. The economy that grows the economy from the middle out and the bottom up instead of just the top down. When that happens, everybody does well. The wealthy still do it, everybody does well. The poor have a ladder up, and the wealthy still do well. We all do well. This vision is a fundamental break from the economic theory that has failed. Much of the technology and machinery that is used to make these chips was designed and produced in the United States. And by uniting our skills and our technological know-how, it allows the production of chips that are critical to both our countries and are essential sectors of our global economy.
There is a ton of news about the fourth stimulus check, Social Security benefits that you have to know, folks, so continue watching this video. You definitely don't want to miss out on this. Now, first of all, Americans are finally receiving their tax refund checks from the federal government, and this could mean several big, huge changes. Tax refund represents a source of joy for millions of households, and this year the average check is about $3,000. Now, according to latest data, refunds are also used to pay down bills, start an emergency fund, or splurge on something special. Refund checks may be pleasant to receive, but they aren't free money from the government.